I was a peculiar kid. I wasn't like everybody else. I was always I was always real joyous and real happy all the time. And my mom was a single mom, and she we grew up where my mom and my dad had divorced when I was like one, and so I really didn't get to, have a home where my mom and my dad were together. So my mom was a single mom, and we didn't really have much. My dad abused my mom. And so she left, flew a plane, went back home to live with my grandparents, and so I was just in a single household with my mom, but my mom was always working, trying to make ends meet. And when I was younger, I went to this place called Jack and Jill, and because so my mother was Catholic. My mother was Catholic, and my dad was Jew. And so you want to talk about a combination of from the world looking at through the world's eye view. I looked like I was going to be in big trouble, right? Either I was going to be Jew or Catholic, both of which are very heretical and nothing that has to do really with the Lord Jesus Christ. But so I was with my mom until I was 13. Oh no, until I was 15. And life was very different. As you can imagine, if any of you have ever grown up in a single household, I was always with my grandma. She was somebody that was just always with me. And so anyway, but with that being said, like we would live as a little girl, I would go to this daycare. It was called Jack and Jill Daycare. And I remember my mom tells me often, she's like, you know, them old school like programs when you used to have, you would stand in front of the class and then you would sing about the Lord. And I don't know if y'all remember that song, but y'all remember that song was like, I may never march in the infantry, ride in the cavalry, shoot the artillery. I may never fly over the enemy, but I'm in the Lord's army. Yeah, y'all remember that song. And I was the kid that was screaming it at the top of my lungs. And at the end, you would always say, yes, sir. And I was just like, I knew that I was in the Lord's army from the time that I was just a little girl. And I didn't know, like, the Lord in as intimate ways I do now, but I always knew that he was there. I always used to go to church with my grandma, and I used to go to choir practice and with her, and I was always going to church. I was always going to mass. And so I was really blessed to know who the Lord was from a little girl. And I was always happy and joyful. And then things changed. And so my grandmother and my grandfather got a divorce. And, sometimes when you're so indoctrinated, and this is what I think angers me so much about the Catholic faith on the outside, is that in the name of religion, people do things that are just not of God. Like, my grandfather cheated on my grandmother, and she was always just put in a position of, Tom, if you don't leave, you can just stay. But they didn't. And finally she got a divorce and she met Larry. Well, Larry was my step grandfather, and he was one of those guys who he was so good to like everybody. But what people didn't know is how sinister he really was. And so like it all started like when I was like 8. And every night that my grandma would go in the shower, he would come in to my bedroom. And the first thing that he would say, he would be like, "Hi, kid." Ooh, gosh, that just makes my skin crawl. And so he just started touching me, and it was so just sneaky the way that he did everything. And so this happened from the time I was like 8 till the time I was 12. And like, now that I'm older, like my aunt would tell me stories of like, one day, Megan, you just went in his barn and you just started hitting everything. And she's like, this was when I was adult. I probably learned this like 3 years ago. And she was like, you would just start hitting stuff, like, and we never knew like what was wrong with you. And finally one day, I'll never forget it, I was sitting in, my mom was cooking beef stroganoff with corn in the kitchen. And I was sitting at the table with her. And I was like, what do you do? I was like, Mom, is it okay for like, people to do things to you? And finally I had told her what happened, and she called my grandma on the phone. And, my grandma didn't believe me. And this was like a Catholic woman, and called the cops, and all of these things started happening. And, for somebody to take your innocence from you as a child, it does something to you. And I remember one day I was walking down the driveway of my grandmother's house, and it was just like this winding driveway, and it was like it was almost like a half a mile. It was so long, and it wound, and it ended up on this really big hill. And as I was standing there, something just came to me and was like, you're never going to have kids. And I thought about it for a moment, and now that I look back, I'll get to that. But anyway, so he was sentenced to jail. Like, one thing that I am so thankful for is like, when something happens to you like that, my mom blessed me so much, and just being there for me. And, we went to court. He got sentenced in a small town. And that time he was sentenced to 3 years, and my grandma had left him. And then he started to call saying that he was going to do all these things and commit, unaliving. And she ended up back with him. But the day that we went to court, she was sitting on his side. And I think that just crushed us all, because I was with her every single day. She was always taking care of me. And so I just kind of detached after that for a little while. And, the thing about it is, though, it's like when you're older and you kind of look back on things, you realize that in the midst of the things happening, like, God was still good, and it's like, so fast forwarding to that, I'm in my 20s. I meet my husband when I was 19. And my mom had, I'm all over the place. So my mom got married when I was 13. So right after he had gotten sentenced, and my brother and sister were born, and I have a twin brother and a twin sister, and they were my whole life. I was never one of those like jealous kids, that was like, oh, well, you have kids and you forget about me. I was never that type of sister. I was always that sister that was, my parents, my mom and my stepdad were building a house, and I was always taking care of them. And I taught them how to swim, and they were like my babies. And, and then things kind of like turned, like I feel like I started to rebel a little bit. And my mom always had a way of like, she was very short-tempered at that time. And one day I had had enough, and I remember she was just kicking me down the hallway a little bit, just because I was probably doing something that I shouldn't have been doing. And I just turned my hand and I just smacked her. And I regretted it. But my mom sent me to my dad's when I was 16. And I was always I had a relationship with my dad, but it was just different. My dad's been married, like, let me see if he's in here real quick. Maybe. No. So my dad's been married like 12 times. Like, I've been through a lot, like, with him, and he was very, he was narcissistic, and I know that he probably wouldn't say that now, but he was very, like, when I lived with him, like, I came with a check, and so because I came with a check, I was, like, treated, differently. I didn't get to go out, like, if my friends wanted to. If I wanted to go out with my friends, like, I had to rub my dad's feet or do just crazy stuff, and my friends would end up having to rub his feet, and they would nail my windows shut, so I thinking that I was going to sneak out. I was just never like that. And I was just, my stepmom was just a nightmare at the time. And like, I started working when I was like 15, and like, they would like make me sign my paycheck over to them. And so I didn't have any money. I worked for nothing. And so, like, I would, like, start to, in the places that I would work, I would, take things. Like, if somebody paid for a sandwich that was cash, I'd put it in my pocket. And it's like, when you're working, same thing with Mariah. Like, you go through these things in your life that you just don't want to do, and it's not you, but you just did them because, like, you felt that how people were treating you and how people were to you, that you just had to, like, try at some point to get what was yours. Well, after 16, I found out, like, my mom had got me a car, and then my dad got it and then traded it in for a new car, and they kicked me out of the house when I was, 18, 19. And I looked back at my dad and I said, you are going to need me before I need you. And I had a backpack, $40, and a job. And I walked down the street, and my friend picked me up, and I stayed with her for a little bit until I could get an apartment. And then I met my husband. I have been married with my husband for 23 years. So God has really been so good to us. We've been through a lot too. But I think the thing for me was when I was, a really big pivotal moment for me was like when I was 26 years old. Like, I had dibbled and dabbled, I think everybody goes through the phase, well, maybe not, but I went through the phase of, smoking marijuana and doing all this stuff. And of course I quit when I was like 23. And then I got into, other things, the drugs that make you, MDMA, all that stuff. So I did that for a little bit. But then I got to a point where I was like 26. And I was just so fed up, because I'm going to tell you something about the Lord. The Lord will bring you around a mountain if it takes 40 years, just like he did the Israelites, in order to get you to the exact place that he has for you. And I have always talked about the Lord. All I did was talk about the Lord as a kid. I was always the Lord, the Lord, the Lord, the Lord all the time. So much so to, like, where my dad would be, Megan, if you tell me about that Jesus, SHIT, one more time, I just don't know what I'm going to do with you. All you do is try to talk to everybody about the Lord, and you push everybody, and it's annoying. So I was always one of those kids that, I was, knew who the Lord was when I was 10, but I just know that from the very beginning of my whole life, now that I'm older, I just always know that he was there. Well, my pivot moment in my life was when I was 26 years old. And you have these realizations when you get out of this stage where like you start to understand like why God gave you your parents. And although that your parents weren't perfect, and although your parents did things or acted in ways that they couldn't, you start to understand, well, my mom was 19 when she had me, and then she went to nursing school and she had a kid and she was a single mom, and she went through all of these things. And then my dad, like, he was abused by his dad, and he was abused by his dad really bad. And so, like, when you get to these ages where you start to realize some things, you understand, like, why God gave you your parents. Like, in the midst of you growing up, you really don't understand, like, why God gave you your parents, or, like, why God does the things that he does. But I know why the Lord gave me mine. And it's just, my dad had 4 other kids. I mean, 3 other kids other than me. And nobody speaks to him to this day. Nobody talks to him. He's done some things, yes. But the thing that, I feel like the Lord gave me my dad because he knew that I would never leave him. And he knew that no matter who left him in his whole life, like whether he was abused or mistreated, he always had me, and I would never leave him. And you read in the Bible about honoring your parents, and it's like, no matter what your parents have put you through, or no matter what your parents have done in your life, or how hard they were on you, or whether they were verbally abusive or whatnot, when you get older, I remember sitting and having a conversation. You have a conversation with your parents and you kind of work out the things that you didn't understand. And then, like with my dad, I told him, I said, I just want to let you know that, like, you loved me the best way that you knew how. Like, even though, like, you've been through things and you've done things, like, you really have loved me the best way that you know how. And I know that, like, we don't realize, like, how much we impact our parents. And so when it comes to the Bible, I think that honoring your mother and father is such a wonderful gift, and the Lord promises that you'll have a long life. And I hold that to the Lord a lot. I'm always like, Lord, you always tell me that you told us that if we're good to our parents and we honor them, that you will give us a long life, Lord. And so I always talk about, just people just honoring their parents, because some people don't have their parents, some people may have lost their parents, but I've been so blessed to just have both of mine, and I just hold them in such honor and high regard. And so I hit 26. And so I noticed a pattern in my life where I remember praying and being like, Lord, why do the same things keep happening over and over and over again? And in my spirit, it's like, my child, if I have to walk you around this mountain for 40 years, I will do so. I am God. You are not. I am God. And so in our lives, we get to these places where we realize that we're being walked around this mountain, so something's got to change, like. And so when I was 26 years old, I was in the living room in my apartment, and all of a sudden it was just like, you need to call Larry. And I'm like, call Larry. And this was the guy that had abused me when I was a kid, right? So I pick up the phone and I call him, and I said, why, Lord? Like, why do you want me to call him? I don't understand. And all of a sudden, I just felt in my spirit, the Holy Spirit was like, I'm going to teach you how to forgive. It's not like the world forgives my child. It's like I do, and I'm going to show you how. And so I was like 28. I called him on the phone and I just lost it, of course. But at the end, I told him that I had forgiven him for what he had done to me. Well, lo and behold, my grandmother gets ovarian cancer. And I'm probably 28 at this time. And so me and my mom get in the car and we go drive 15 hours to go be with my grandma. She had 2 weeks left to live. Like, it was bad. Well, my grandmother was still married to the man that did this to me. And so I wanted to be with her in her last 2 weeks more than anything. And I was not going to let him take from me my last time to be with her. And so we didn't stay at a hotel. I literally stayed in the house with the man who did this to me for 2 weeks. I saw him every single day. And it's the same house with the same smells, like when you have like traumatic things that happen to you in your life, all of these things start flooding back. And so you just remember smells and you remember where the furniture is. And like, I hadn't been to my grandma's house probably since that happened because it destroyed our family. And so I get there and he's there. And so we stayed down in the basement because she had a finished basement and he was there. We stayed with her for 2 weeks. And I'm going to tell you something about forgiveness. When it comes to forgiveness, the enemy will test you in that. In certain ways that we really don't expect. And so he started to ask really weird questions. Like, he would ask things like, where are the pictures of Margaret when she was a child? And it would just send me like to places. And I'm like, why is a grown man asking about my grandmother's baby pictures and what she was as a child? And so finally, I had had enough. And I told my mom and my aunt, I said, you guys need to go downstairs. So my grandmother was sleeping, of course, and he's sitting in this rocking chair in the living room. Sorry, I get a little overwhelmed. And I walk up to him and I'm like, do you realize what you have done? I said, you have taken everything from me. I said, you have taken my family. We were so close before all this has ever happened. You have taken everything from me. You've taken my innocence. You've taken my family. I said, do you realize what you have done? And he was sitting there and he was like, Megan, you really don't know how much I have suffered. And I just lost my marbles. It was way more than that, but I'm giving you the gracious part. And so he sat there and he was like, you just don't realize how much I have suffered my entire life knowing what I did to you. And I'm like, I hope you don't ever forget it. And so it was like a couple of days later, and he just kept rubbing me the wrong way. But then I was just like, okay, Lord, you're going to have to get me through this. I said, I know that you have purpose in this, Father. And I ask, Lord God, that you just please show me and teach me And help me to understand what the whole purpose of this is, Lord. So my grandmother passes away. And we're all just heartbroken and we're all so sad. And I think it made me sad because she was such a wonderful woman and she stayed with a man that did this to her granddaughter. And me and my mom would talk about it all the time. And I just feel like she just got robbed and it just upsets me so much. But anyway, so after she passes away, we're waiting for the coroner's office to come, and Larry is sitting in the kitchen at this table. So like when you would walk into the living room, there was like a bar. And he was sitting there and he was crying. And I knew how bad that I had felt. But for that moment, I looked over at him and I was like, he misses her. He's sad. He really did love her. And whatever was, I know that the Lord was moving in me that day. And